Hi, welcome to the lecture on Chapter 2. I know this is a seated class, but maybe this will help you if you need to refer to it later, either for the prepping for one of the exams or just trying to remember to how to build your VM machine a little bit later. So hopefully in this chapter we're going to prepare for and install Fedora. Kind of give you an outline of the structure of the Linux interface, some basic shell commands and how to find command documentation, and of course, maybe how to shut down a Linux operating system correctly. Now, installing a Linux machine, there's definitely some prep you need to do. You need to make sure that you understand the minimum requirements, hardware requirements to perform the installation. And granted, you can get that from vendor website, DVD if you purchase the DVD version of it. Each component in your physical device needs to be matched up to a hardware compatibility list. Again, found on whichever vendor of machine that you have. But some basic minimum requirements: you need 1 gigahertz processor speed, 1 gig of RAM, 10 gig of free space, a DVD drive would be nice, and then potentially other peripheral devices, video cards, sound cards, network cards, based on what you're trying to do. One we're going to do in class, and at home, I'll probably have you do a 2 gigahertz processor, maybe 2 gig of RAM, probably 20 gig of free space, and then we'll let the rest of it default. So just give you an idea, because we're going to be installing a little bit, I think Fedora 27 is what we're going to be installing. Now, understanding your installation media. Now, granted, all the instructions here is DVD and DVD images, but most of them you're going to download from the website, and it's going to be an ISO image. So probably about a fairly large file, but at least it can be used as a DVD image, but it can be read in that way. Now, many websites will allow you to download a bootable live image, so it just depends on. So you just got to be careful which one you're going to download. If you don't have a DVD drive, you want to make sure that you have a live media DVD or a live media DVD image to put on a USB flash drive, because you can install Linux on a flash drive. Now, Fedora has a live USB creator program which would allow you to create, which based on what you're going to download it to, what it exists to, and what you're going to download it to. We're not going to use that in class. The ISO files have already been downloaded and installed on the machine in your machines in class. Now, we're going to be running it on a virtual machine. And basically all it is, virtual machine is basically, it's a software program that is running on physical hardware. But that software emulates a computer. There's definitely several different out there: Microsoft Hyper-V, VMware, and Oracle's VirtualBox. I've given you a link to VirtualBox and to download a copy of that, and we've got information. I've given you information. Hopefully, you've logged in and downloaded a copy of Workstation, which would allow you to then create VMwares. Out of the three here, if I had a preference, I'd go VMware first, VirtualBox second, only from the standpoint that VMware has, to me, it seems like a better relationship to the hardware. It doesn't allow you to shoot yourself in the foot too badly. If you only have 4 gig of memory in the machine, it won't let you try to build a virtual machine of 6. Or VirtualBox doesn't have those same checks, at least the last time I played with it. But either way, either one of these will work. Played with Hyper-V a little bit, just not as smooth as the other two. But basically, virtual machine is you're going to install an operating system in a software. So I'm going to put software in a software running on a hardware platform. Even though I'm going to interface to all the physical hardware, but I'm never going to totally replace the operating system that's on your machine. So it kind of isolates your environment from the machine you're building. So you can run this Linux workstation, Linux virtual machine on top of a Microsoft Office or a Microsoft Windows platform, and you never know. Now, to install Linux as a virtual machine, one, you got to download a copy of the ISO file. We're going to do that. And it says virtual machine host. That is actually your PC, your physical PC is your virtual machine host. You got to open up the virtualization software. So in this case, whether you're using, right now I'll play the workstation. Since it's giving you instructions in workstation, you can open up, VM workstation. It's going to ask you to create a new virtual machine. And part of that is it's going to ask you where the appropriate ISO image. So we got to make sure that you know where you've saved that downloaded ISO image. On the machines in class, there should be on each of your PCs a directory called ISO, and in there are several different versions, and we'll install all of them. But right now we're going to stick with I think Fedora to start with. So it may look something like this, where you're going to say, I'm going to look at my image file. Make sure you find the right day. You browse to find the right directory, so that way you understand this. Now, when you're doing a normal installation of Fedora, it involves some general stages. One, it starts the installation. Then you got to choose what language and locations, and they'll ask you some questions on system options. Then we'll talk about configuring disk partitions in file systems, and then user accounts. So those are the 4 major categories, stages that it goes through. Now, what I want to do is, there's a couple of different ways you can play this. If you're installing this on a physical machine, you could actually boot, change the boot location to the DVD drive, and then boot, and it would install this. We're not going to do it that way. So we're going to start up, VMware Workstation, and then install the software from there. Now, of course, what you can do, if you did boot from Fedora Workstation, you get prompted. You want to start installation. You want to troubleshoot an installation. Of course, then you're asked, what are your options? Do you want to just start the option in a basic graphics mode? Do you want to test the media and then start? Do you want to check your memory, make sure it's not corrupted? Or do you want to boot from a different local drive? In most cases, I can't remember in a long time if I've ever had to even run into the troubleshooting option stages. So normally if I was booting from a DVD, I would install the DVD and then start Fedora Live and then let it upload it. Once everything's been uploaded, you're going to get a welcome message, and then it'll prompt for How do you want, do you want to install this to permanent? So in this case, it's going to ask you, do you want to install the hard drive? And in our case, we're going to. Now, then it'll ask you what your language is, the keyboard layout. Are you going to attain your IP address from a DHCP, date and time, automatically determined? All of these are going to be done for you. Which languages you're going to choose. You want to make sure you choose English, United States, unless you want to speak a different language. Localization. These are some of your options that you can pick and choose. What I usually like to do, you must install, an installation destination. That way, at least it knows, where am I going to store this? Some of the more common devices that you store Linux on are Parallel Advanced Technology, Serial Advanced, or small computer system interfaces. Those are different types of hard disks. I think most of the ones we're going to do are going to be through SCSIs. But then you're going to click through the installation destination, and you're going to get permanent storage devices. Right now, we're not setting up multiple disks on this. We're not doing external storage, not doing it on direct access, and I'm not doing it on a redundant. But showing you the flexibility of Linux, you could have installed it in any one of those. But basically, we're going to just hard load, install it to our main drive. Now, each hard disk, you can break it into smaller pieces, partitions. Now, all they are is, sections of a hard drive that I can break into smaller pieces to have for certain purposes that can isolate action in what you want to do in certain areas. So what we're going to do is, it says you can do up to 4. You can do an extended partition divided across logical drives. We're not going to get into a lot of that, just knowing that Linux has that capability. Then in your operating system, the master boot record is a table that shows all the different partitions and information about all the hard drives and anything out there. So now Linux gives certain names, so you get used to. Right now, you're used to the C drive or a D drive or other Windows type drive. Linux has a little different abbreviation where it's SDA. So it's kind of a SCSI device. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So it gives you different naming. So just don't get a little nervous when you see SDA1 versus the C drive. Now, file systems can be accessed by Linux only if they're attached or they're mounted to a certain directory. Now, Fedora can automatically generate partitions, but we're not going to have the system, when we do the install, we're not going to have it create partitions for us. We're just going to keep one partition. Now, Linux typically requires only 2 partitions. One is for the root directory, and one is virtual memory for swap spaces. And that's just an area used to store information normally residing in your RAM, your physical memory, your random access memory. So it only requires 2, and it'll ask you 3. Now, some of the file systems that you're going to see and become familiar with in this class is you see here the common sizes. You got your the base directory. We're going to have 20 gig, and it contains everything underneath it. The boot directory includes the kernel and the boot file, so when you bring the machine up, this is where the system's going to process that data. You have a home directory. This is the location where each user's data is going to be stored. So you're going to have your own home directory, and as you go through this, all your files are going to get stored under your home directory. So anything new that we create is going to be put there. You've got the /user, which ends up being some system commands and utilities. User local would be a location for additional packages that may be installed. Now, the /opt is another alternative location for those. It just depends on what kind of packages you're installing, where they want to install them. /var is kind of an area that controls all the log files and spools files, so it depends on how the system's being used. This could be where your print server spool is. So something like that. And then your /tmp holds temporary programs. So those are temp files that are created by programs that are stored in that location. So these are some of the generic files that are created. Now, configuring disk partitions and file systems, there are a couple of different types of file systems. Most computers use the extension 2. Extension 3 and 4 are used for journaling. VFAT makes it compatible to a Windows FAT file, and the riser ends up performing journaling. Now, journaling just keeps track of information that's written to the hard drive, so that you're just keeping records as to who's writing what. But I think most of this class, we're going to keep most of our stuff to ext2, so you should be okay. Now, once you've done the installation, you may be prompted to choose a partitioning scheme, whether the number of and types of partitions you want to configure should be done automatically, but you could create your own, and you could decide whether you want your contents of the partition to be encrypted for security purposes. Now, we're not going to go through that, so would you like to? I want to, want to modify, do I want to encrypt my data? In our case, I'll have to double check my notes to see which way I want to go with that. I may want us to just review and then continue just so we can see what's going to be there. Now, if you didn't want the standard partition, we could choose a partition scheme that would create logical volumes. And then the logical volume manager would then control where everything is. And you could even create a volume that supported a B-tree file system. Just faster access. So just, again, showing you how flexible Linux operating system is. But it's also, if partitioning does allow sometimes some easier system recovery, especially if you don't have the contents encrypted. User accounts, what is it? It does a couple of things. One, it authenticates who gets into your machine. What we want to do is make sure you probably configure 2 accounts. One is the administrator account. It's called root, R-O-O-T. And then a regular user account, so you can actually, one, log in as a general user or as the administrator to be able to make physical changes to, install programs, because most new operating systems or new installation of new software is going to require you to be an administrator to install major software. So you're going to create new user accounts. You're going to make sure you put passwords on them. I think right now it starts out root has no password when it comes up, but you're going to create an administrator account and a root account and a regular user account, and it'll look something like this. This is 20, so 27 it looks a little bit different. Now that you got everything installed, there's some basic things that we just kind of help you through some of the commands. There's different types, of user interface, and there's some basic tasks, command execution, because obtaining online help, how to shut down the system. Because remember, even though when you bring up, it's going to come in a GUI interface, similar to when you installed your Windows operating system or turned out you bought your new computer. We're going to take it a little bit deeper than that to help. Now, there's certain things that, types of software that's running. One, you've got the terminal. And a terminal is just a channel that allows users to log in to the kernel. And the kernel is the core of what's operating this whole operating system. The shell is basically a user interface that you go with, that you're interfacing with, typing in commands, the way it looks and feels. There is a bash, which is a born-again shell. It's your basic Linux or default Linux shell. There's a command line session. Linux allows multiple terminals, so multiple users, to be used with its each shell, because it's a multi-user, multitasking operating system, as we found out in Chapter 1. So here you got multiple terminals attached to different shells, approaching, all of them connected to the core of the system. Now, there's graphical user interface. There's a couple of different out there, but once you bring it up, it's going to be a graphical user interface on top of a shell. Now, you can change to a graphical terminal. You can, from a local server, you can have special keys to change it. Now, one thing you want to make sure is when you're looking at the command line, now, remember in, well, we won't go there. What happens is with Linux is as you're going to pay attention to the command prompt, or so that it's going to change based on the route, where you are in the system, and what permissions you have. Here you're going to know that if your command prompt ends in a £, you're logged in as the root user, so you have administrative purposes. If it's a $, then that means you are in as a regular user, and there's some commands that will not be available to you. Now, you can, different types of Linux terminals. We're going to be a lot of our stuff in command line, so to get to them, we can go there. Now, the default GUI environment is GNOME for Fedora Linux. Now the command line terminal can be accessed by going to the activities menu. It's in the upper left-hand corner. When you first bring it up, it's upper left-hand corner. You're going to go, navigate to show applications, utilities, and then terminal to get to the command line. And like I said, we're going to spend a lot of time on command line. Now, once you're at the command line, so the commands are going to indicate the program you want to execute. They are case sensitive. Now, some commands have options with them, and they're going to be specific letters starting with a dash and appear after the command line. So you have the command line space, dash, and whatever the options are. And then you're going to have, so you got options, and then you got arguments, but arguments don't start with a dash. So some basic commands that you're going to play with and get comfortable with. Here are just some common ones. I won't go through them all, but it tells you who it is, the date, the calculator, calendar, who am I, clear the screen, who's logged in, what are they doing, what number of processes are running. Now, there are some special characters, and basically they're called shell meta characters, and these shells include, they start with a $sign, but you want to make sure you avoid some of the special characters. We'll get into what they are a little bit later. If for some reason you want to use a meta character, you need to encase it in single quotes. Here's some meta characters, some special characters that you just got to be, that you'll have to get comfortable with. Now, there's a couple of things for getting help. The system has manual pages, and we get used to man pages, and you type in the man space and followed by the command, and it gives you all the information about that command. Now they contain different sections and section numbers. They're searchable by keywords. Different sections in there, in the manual sections, based on who you are and what you're looking for, but they're at least categorized by sections that you can get there. Now, the GNU set of easy to command section, at the command prompt, type in info, followed by the command name. It was intended to replace the man pages. Some commands have man info pages, so you're just going to have to play. But you've got two different types of that. Now, shutting down a Linux system, you don't want to just power off your machine. You want to use the shutdown command, which then will allow me to halt and reboot your system after a period of time. Now, if for some reason you start a shutdown and need to stop that process, you can hit the Control and C character and then issue the shutdown-C to cancel that shutdown command. So here's some other power off, systems that you can play with. So hopefully this gives you a very high level. We'll go through more in class as far as, installation and playing some of this stuff. And hopefully this helps. Thanks.